This video was brought to you by Brilliant. Since the national election back in November, politicians in the Netherlands have been scrambling to assemble a government. 6 months of political drama saw coalition partners quit talks, change their minds, stipulated who they wanted, or rather didn't want as Prime Minister, and even threatened to go back to the polls if they couldn't reach an agreement. This week though, Geert Wilders' Freedom Party, or PVV, has finally managed to cobble together a government, one that will see the country's politics lurch rightwards. So in this video, we're going to take a look at the new coalition, its specific policies, and who might end up being the Netherlands' most right-wing Prime Minister in decades. Before we start, if you haven't already, please consider subscribing and ringing the bell to stay in the loop and be notified when we release new videos. So let's start with a quick recap. In November, the Dutch national election saw Wilders' PVV win 37 seats in the 150-seat House of Representatives, becoming the largest party for the first time, a position that had previously been held by the centre-right People's Party, VVD, since 2010. Anyway, this meant that the 4 incumbent parties in the government of acting Prime Minister Mark Rutte, i.e. the People's Party, VVD, the Social Democrats, D66, Christian Democratic Appeal, CDA, and Christian Union, CU, had all lost seats, while the centre-right New Social Contract, or NSC party, emerged with a solid 20. Now, these results were obviously a massive victory for Wilders, who campaigned on an anti-Islam, Eurosceptic platform, promising to ensure that, quote, the Dutch get their country back. However, it didn't go down so well with the other right-wing parties. The leaders of the Conservative People's Party, Dylan Yeşilgöz, and the right-wing NSC, Peter Omtzigt, both signalled that they wouldn't serve in a cabinet led by Wilders. This was partly because of Wilders' highly controversial views, but also because of a lack of trust in his party's ability to handle public finances. Anyway, coalition talks ended up collapsing in early February after the NSC pulled out, and as a result, Wilders was forced to publicly concede that he could not be Dutch Prime Minister in order to get the other parties back on board. Then, with the negotiation deadline approaching, this week the 4 parties, Wilders' PVV, the VVD, the NSC, and the Farmer Citizen Movement, or BBB, finally announced a coalition agreement. In order to get the other parties' support, Wilders has dropped some of his more radical social policies, including a ban on the Quran and mosques, and cut back his spending plans, including on free transport. Nonetheless, the 26-page manifesto published on Thursday suggests that this will still be one of the most radical, or at least most right-wing, governments in Dutch history. So, with that, let's take a look at the manifesto itself. Or should we say, in the interest of brevity, we've picked out a few of the key points. And if you're interested, you should definitely flick through the whole thing. Let's start with the most controversial plans outlined in the agreement, with, you guessed it, migration. The manifesto offers what they claim to be the strictest and most comprehensive package for controlling migration ever, which includes restoring border checks and creating mini Schengen zones. The new government also wants to invoke emergency temporary legislation, the Asylum Crisis Act, to limit the inflow of migrants. This act will suspend the processing of asylum applications, scrap automatic family reunification, deport people without a valid residence permit, and asylum seekers will no longer be given priority in the allocation of social housing. An opt-out clause for the EU's migration policy will also be submitted as soon as possible. Study migration will also be curbed by offering more courses in Dutch, introducing a cap on foreign students, and increasing tuition fees for non-EU students. Next up, foreign policy, where the new government has reiterated its support for Ukraine politically, militarily, financially, and morally against Russian aggression, which sets it apart from other right-wing governments in Europe like Hungary and Serbia, and will make NATO's 2% defense spending target legally binding. More controversial, though, is the coalition's strong pro-Israel stance. While most countries have their embassies in Tel Aviv rather than Jerusalem, which is claimed by both Israel and Palestine, the new manifesto says that there'll be an examination of when the embassy can be moved to Jerusalem. It then immediately moves on to the issue of Islamist extremism, with the government saying that it wants to try and establish an international tribunal for crimes, including genocide, committed by the Islamic State. Now, one major domestic issue for the government is reducing its historic housing shortage, which is one of the worst in Europe. Back in November, the housing crisis was the biggest concern for voters at the Dutch election, and it's estimated that the Netherlands currently needs about 390,000 new homes. In response, the new government will look to build 100,000 new homes every year, 30% of which should be for social housing. Additionally, the government wants to improve the country's energy sovereignty. The manifesto states that the new cabinet will work on expanding offshore natural gas extraction and nuclear energy as part of plans to reduce dependence on, quote, unreliable countries. The new coalition is heading for 4 large new nuclear plants, and not the 2 that were previously suspected, and all existing reactors will be kept open, unlike in Germany. And finally, as the world's second largest exporter of agricultural products, the incoming government is looking to scrap the EU's pollution reduction plan. In order to meet the original EU directive, which required a halving of Dutch nitrogen emissions, the previous government tried to reduce cattle numbers and force farmers to sell their farms. For months, Dutch farmers protested against these plans, and now, in response, the incoming government has said that there'll be no forced reduction of the livestock herd, and that they want farmers, gardeners, and fishermen to have a future again. But while the 4 parties have been able to agree to a manifesto, and agree that the People's Party will lead the Finance Ministry and the NSC the Foreign Ministry, they haven't agreed who gets to be Prime Minister. We know that it's not going to be Wilders, and it's probably not going to be one of his MPs, given that none of them have ministerial experience. So it's possible that Wilders may pick an MP from the VVD to take the reins. While Geert Wilders, the current leader of the People's Party and outgoing Justice Minister, could have been a potential candidate, apparently all leaders of the coalition parties will be stepping down to the lower parliament, staying as MPs, including BBB leader Caroline van der Plas, Wilders' closest ally in the coalition, who supported Wilders to becoming Prime Minister. According to local media, Wilders has asked Ronald Plasterk, a former minister from the Dutch Labour Party, but Plasterk has refused to comment. It's also possible that both the VVD and NSC would struggle to accept a centre-left politician as their leader anyway. It looks like we'll just have to wait and see who ends up ruling, so subscribe to stay updated. Ultimately underpinning this topic is a lot of data, whether that's economics, trade patterns, polling, or demographics. A lot of the time with politics, you just have to understand the data. So if you want to get a better grasp on these kind of things, I'd recommend Brilliant. And they've just introduced a whole bunch of new data courses, which are perfect for learners of any level, taking you through everything from Bayes' theorem to multiple linear regression. It even uses real data sets from the likes of Starbucks, X, and Spotify in order to bring things to life. I'm not even a super mathematical person, and I still found it easy and enjoyable to work through. And that's because of how Brilliant is designed, built around learning by doing, with thousands of interactive lessons in maths, data analysis, programming, and AI. The good thing is that, like I mentioned earlier, you can learn all of these things quickly and easily because Brilliant's courses are split into easy to digest chunks. Brilliant helps you build real knowledge in just minutes a day, with fun lessons that you can do whenever you have time, replacing mindless scrolling on the train or while waiting for coffee with something actually stimulating and rewarding. So get learning across all kinds of STEM subjects for free for a full 30 days by clicking the link in the description. That way you'll also get 20% off an annual premium subscription, and they'll know that you came from us, which really helps us out.